So who was at the first talk on postcards? Was anybody? Oh, see, I probably could have done the same one again and gotten away with it. But, so I made a point of making sure that I didn't repeat myself with the exception of maybe 2 slides. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun putting this together. I probably have edited and re-edited this about 35 times and keep changing my mind because there's just so many great images that we have and so many great postcards. But so why do we have all this? So when photography came along in the mid-1800s, it completely changed the way people saw the world. You know, how small towns like Manchester, Vermont could show themselves off, how they would promote it. I mean, we had some great promoters of this area. You know, the early photographers, I mean, they lugged around these big wooden cameras, which were like 3 foot by 3 foot. I mean, just enormous things. And when I see the places, I know the vantage points. And I think, how did these guys carry that stuff up here? Because nothing was ergonomically correct back then. And, you know, they were carrying plate glass negatives with them. You know, and this was all just to capture the hills, the mountains, the inns, main streets. And those images originally were turned into stereoscope cards. You know, almost identical images that when you look through the viewer, they would give you almost like a 3D image as you were looking at them. And, you know, before long, those became cabinet cards. I'm going to talk a little more about that. And, you know, all this was to give somebody something to bring home with them, or for those who lived here to send a little piece of home to them. So that's what I want to start with, you know, the before postcards. And, you know, I had talked about stereoscopes. So the stereoscopes, you know, this is a shot of the Taconic Hotel. And just to show you how large, I actually brought along one of the stereoscope cards. So we have dozens of these. And if you have a chance, you could come visit us at the Historical Society, and you could sit down with a stereoscope viewer, and they sit about this close to your face, and you look through them, and it's like looking through a 3D camera, so to speak. And these came into fashion, you know, 1850s was a little early on the side, but they do have existed. They went up through the 1910s. You know, at the height of the Victorian era, they were very popular in the parlors. And, you know, they produced tens of thousands of them, you know, in New England alone. And every time I think I've seen all of them, every once in a while, one will pop up on an auction site, and I will get myself all worked up about it and try to outbid somebody. But they, you know, why were they? I mean, the purpose was for, you know, education, tourism, and just plain old entertainment. Virtual travel, VR for the Victorian age. This is the Gates of Delwood. As you heard, I'm a trustee there, so I'm very partial to them. Those gates were actually given by Judge Mark Skinner. The statuaries were carved in Italy, and he had them shipped over here in the late 1870s. And that's what's actually the stereoscope. And if you'd like to come out afterwards and see the stereoscope a little closer, I'd be happy to show it to you. But, you know, as photography continued to improve, you know, in came, you know, the cabinet cards. And those were really mounted on thick decorative cardboard. Usually the photographer would have his studio, you know, embossed on the bottom, and they were a bit larger. So this is what a cabinet card looked like, and this is that exact photo with J.D. Way, who was a photographer here from about 1888 until I think he died in 1895 of tuberculosis. And people would fashion these in their homes, you know, kind of build like these pyramids and just stack them with one another. It's kind of interesting to see how they displayed them. And this was really how people would send them around. But as you can see, I mean, they're rather large. So, you know, and there's actually what would be the southern part of the equinox. And people really wanted to communicate a little bit easier. And postcards were highly regulated. And so here's going to be some of the eras that we're going to speak about. The pioneer era, the private mailing cards, the undivided back, the divided back, the white border, linen, and then kind of the photochrome era. I did go through, when I put this together originally, I went through to see, well, what did it cost to actually mail a card? And this kind of gives you a lowdown. I mean, when they started in 1873, they were 2 cents and dropped down to a penny. And up until as recent as 1975, which I would say wasn't that long ago, but well, I guess it was a little while ago, it was 9 cents. And today it costs anywhere from 56 cents to 73 cents to send a postcard. So what was this pioneer period that I was speaking about, the 1870 through 1898? So Hyman Littman was the first one who began reissuing postcards under his name, Littman's Postcards, because Congress had passed legislation on June 8, 1872 that approved government production of postcards. The first government-produced postcard was issued on May 1st, 1873. One side of the postcard was for the message, the other side was for the recipient's address. By law, the government postcards were the only postcards allowed to bear the term postal card. It's a true story. Private publishers were allowed to print postcards, but they were more expensive to mail. So, yeah, right, so if you wanted your own, then you had to pay more. Government postcards, were 2 cents. You could send them for a penny to 2 pennies, and there was about an extra penny for private mailers. I don't actually have one. I actually took this from the Smithsonian site just to show you what the Littman postcards look like. But as time went on, I did actually find some private postcards for the government use. And you'll see this is one from the Davis Tin Shop, which was down in Manchester Depot, and it shows what they had to look like. And they would say, United States government, nothing but the address to be on the side. And on the back side, they would have messages. And I always get a kick out of this card. It's probably one of my favorite in the collection. It says, we have received a bale from Manchester without an invoice. Did you ship the same? If so, please send invoice. Now you think about it, this was sent on July 27th, 1892. So they would have received it, written this postcard, sent it to Manchester. They would have received it, replied, sent an invoice back. It probably would have taken maybe 8-9 days. You think this is the type of thing we would send a text for today, or maybe an email. It was just a slower way of doing business, a slower way of life, which I can certainly appreciate, and sometimes wish those emails would come a little slower. And then we went to the private mailing card period. And in 1898, Congress passed an act allowing private printing companies to produce postcards with the statement private mailing card, authorized by Act of Congress, May 19th, 1898. So, and now they also allowed the cards to cost the same amount of money in the mail as the government produced, but they still had to have the private mailing card on there. So the government remained, it was pretty strict. I don't know what the fines were or if anybody was ever prosecuted for violating these, but this is how they would have, you would have had to operate. Then finally, in 1901, the Postmaster General issued Post Office Order number 1447, which allowed the words postcard instead of the longer private mailing card on the back of postcards. So now the printers were also allowed to omit the line citing the 1898 Private Mailing Card Act. And however, the messages were still not allowed on the address side of the postcards. So by this time, most of the postcard had images which eliminated some of the space for messages. But because of the absence of message space, the address side of the postcards, that postcard period became also known as the undivided back period. And to go back to our first, kind of the first image you saw up there. So this is Burton. So this shows you they had a little area on the right, and this was actually a postcard that was sent by Charles Young, who actually, he had a tin shop over on Barnumville Road, right at the corner of Barnumville Road and Route 7, and also started a shoe shop, which actually carried on right up and through the 1980s, called Purdy's. And this is what the back of the card would look like. So just the name and the town. And this was sent in 1906. Before everybody sat down, and I had that cover image up, and it said, when was that photo taken? And the answer is, I'm not sure. I can tell you it was definitely taken before 1906, but sometimes you would see very early images that would be printed as late as the 1930s. So you can't necessarily go by, well, when was it sold and when was it postmarked? So unless you had direct access to the original photographs, sometimes it's hard to date them or really get down to the minutia of it. What I did find very interesting, a lot of the postcards here were actually printed in Germany. The German printers dominated the postcard industry. They had the best technology for it. One of the reasons that when they finally loosened up the regulations, Manchester itself is indebted, I think, to the Hard family. Jesse Hard owned a drugstore on Main Street in what is Little Equinox, or where Heart of the Village Yoga is today. And you can see by this, so he advertised for years, 4 postcards free with every 50-cent purchase. So as a result, we have hundreds of Jan Hard postcards, which are great. And he would just constantly reproduce them and reproduce them. And I'm just going to show you a few of the wonderful postcards that we have from the Jan Hard. And you can tell because down here in the lower right or lower left corner, I will actually blow that up so you can kind of see it. Published by Hard's Drugstore. So this is the village green with the Soldiers Monument in the center, looking down Main Street. Very quiet, summer afternoon. No cars yet. One of the funny images you can see here is the Soldiers Monument, and you can see the sender had given the likeness of Ethan Allen a pipe. Some of the graffiti that was done on the postcards, some of it is really funny, some of it not entirely appropriate. So you'll just have to take my word for it. I really love some of the Hard postcards, and even Hildene was here. And what I always find interesting about this series of Hildene photos is Robert was a very, very private man, but he did allow postcards to be made of his home. And part of that was because he was also a director of the Manchester Business Association, which was developed in 1902 to promote Manchester. So what better name to promote Manchester than Robert Todd Lincoln, especially for the time. So sometimes it would have his name, sometimes it would just have Hildene, but we have numerous Hildene postcards from the time Robert was still alive. Another shot, we'll start to see automobiles creep into the photos. Right in the center, you can see the little car coming up Main Street. So this image would have been taken probably at the southern end of Equinox Junior, looking down Main Street. And there used to be the green used to kind of stretch a bit further down. And I don't think it was until the 1940s that changed. But people, and their need to, convey the message, they would use any available space. I was going to try to transcribe this, but when I read the actual message, I can tell you it wasn't really all too insightful, but this is an image. It says, "Best wishes for a Happy New Year, 1907." And that's actually the Norcross West Marble Company, which was where Earth and Sea is on Richville Road. And the Norcross West Company is so when you drive by the swimming quarry, that's the quarry. And so they would quarry it up in South Dorset and send it down to Manchester Depot, at first by Teamsters, and then later on the Manchester, Dorset, and Granville Railroad, and that's where it all ended up before being shipped down to New York. So I mentioned this divided back, undivided back. Well, what does that mean? So the divided back period is when they decided to strike a line down the center. And I'll show you what it looks like in the next. And it was really, I think, to help the post office to actually deliver, because some of them, they write the address. I mean, you really have to be pretty aware to actually find out where the address is on the back side of it. I'm actually still impressed that I can actually handwrite once in a while. When I do handwrite something, that it actually arrives at the destination. I don't know how. And this is before AI, so. So when they say divided back, here's a divided back where you would put the correspondence on the left, the address on the right. Now some people would get very excited and just write all the way across it. Up and down and around. As far as I could tell, they didn't actually mail this because there's no stamp, so I'm guessing they started writing and then realized, well, I guess I'll just have to stick this in an envelope and mail it. But really why why I love the postcards so much is because we get into the photo postcards. And, that's the most popular. That's gold. This would be the golden era of postcards, and why people would have large postcard collections, which is, I guess, have kind of gone the way of stamp collectors. I actually have a stamp collection and a bunch of cigar boxes at my house, but I never started a postcard collection. Now I oversee probably one of the largest ones I've ever encountered. So let's look through some interesting images. The first one I wanted to share with you was the center school. Let me look around here. Anybody would have gone, now if Mike Powers was here, he would say, I went to that school. Andy, did you go to the center school? Andy Shaw, the president of the Historical Society in denial over there. So, yeah, it closed in 1950. So the center schoolhouse was in the center, and you notice to the right is a church, and that is the Zion Episcopal Church. So the center school was actually in where the parking lot is now. And when Manchester Elementary School opened in 1950, all the small one-room schoolhouses were consolidated to MES. And the schoolhouse remained for a number of years until I think it was 1967 they tore it down because the church needed parking. So, I mean, they paved Paradise and put up a parking lot. Although I'm sure some people were very happy to see that building come down. One little interesting factoid, and I was going to stick that photo in here, but I didn't because it wasn't a postcard. The cupola up on top, if you drive up Mount Aeolus Lane, it's actually sitting in the West family's front yard because it was saved. Yeah, so you can actually, it's still there. So if you drive down Mount Aeolus Lane, just kind of look over at the West House and you'll see this big, it's pretty easy to see because it's rather large. It looks very out of place, but it's still sitting there. So a little bit of this is still around. And the bell that was in the belfry ended up down in Florida. And Tate drove down to get it in 1995, I think. So, and that's actually in the foyer of Manchester, in MEMS. You can go in there and see the original bell that was there. Another great little, which I always love, pictures of the toll gate. So if you go up to Mistral's, where you walk into Mistral's is actually where the old toll gate house was. And, well, it was a toll road. So if you wanted to go from Manchester up to Peru, you actually had to pay. And it was actually the last toll road in Vermont. It was actually made public in 1917, and there were 141 water bars from basically where Mistral's was to the top of the mountain. Now, if you can imagine being on a stagecoach or in a wagon and having to endure that. Yeah, exactly. And the gentleman there who was a toll house keeper who. Well, he doesn't have his pants buttoned, but I'm not going to judge. And this is a shot looking down Highland Avenue, actually. So if you were at Highland Avenue in Barnumville and looking back towards the depot, way down in the distance, which I'll blow this up for you, that is actually the Fowler House. This photo was taken probably about maybe 1910 or so by the maker's marks that are on there. And the Fowler House is I call it the Smurf House. It's kind of a blue house at the top of Highland Avenue that has the round, what's the word I'm looking for there? I think it's for sale right now. But yeah, this is Highland Avenue. As we go through, here's a great shot of Mount Equinox. And what I love about this shot is actually the Manchester Airport is in this shot. In 1928, Louise Simon Orvis actually opened the Manchester Airport. She had done she was the proprietor of all the Equinox properties. And in the 1920s, we were in the roaring 20s. And in 27, she decided she wanted to have a new golf course. She hired Walter Travis, who had co-designed Aquanic, and turned their little 9-holer that was the Hillside Club into an 18-hole golf course. She opened up the airport, and then everything crashed in 29. So the airport did actually operate for a while, and is still there. The airfield is still there. Actually, the Levis family owns it now. But you can see and I'm not sure how well that's showing up on the screen, but you can see on the roof of the hangar it says Airport Manchester, Vermont. It's down in the lower left-hand corner here. You can see. And when I'm looking through these, because it just says this is a view of Equinox, but for me as a historian, it's like great. Like, what do you see in the foreground? What do you see in the background? And that's where all the excitement leads. And then we get into the white border period. Well, what is the white border period? As I mentioned, all the best printing technology was in Germany and Holland, but a lot of them came over from Europe. Some came over from England. And, well, we went to war. And so basically right around 1912, 1913, that line of printing, that avenue of printing kind of was shut off. And the Americans supplied most of the postcards in the United States. Now, the American printers didn't have that same technology, and so the quality available for postcards fell off pretty precipitously. And people lost interest in collecting them and sending them. And it kind of effectively ended that kind of early golden age of postcards. So, and then also it was during wartime, so printers needed to save ink, by not printing, edge to edge of all the cards. And so they left a white border around the image and giving it that name. So when I say the white border period, this would be an example of the white border period. Again, this was published by the Hards Drug Store, and you can see they could, instead of having the full image, they would start cropping them all the way around, Mount Equinox from the Equinox House. When I first started looking at images of Manchester, I said, well, where is this and what is that? So this would be actually this is the old spa building out back. So the spa building is where Franklin Orvis started bottling spring water off Mount Equinox and selling it. And he did this from the 1890s, and actually it ran until about 1926 when they shut it down. And this building that you see here in the background is no longer there, but it was, as I understand it, was the women's dormitory for the Equinox employees, because I've heard stories about what would happen there between the local boys and the gals. They would go down there. And it was torn down, I think, in ¡68, and this is where they put all the landscape debris now from the Equinox. So if you were ever walking from the Equinox up, past McCormick Field, you would actually look to the left and see all this landscape debris on a perfectly level ground, and that's where the spa building was. Looking at Main Street, they would actually, and I would love to have a better image of this, and when I say that the printing technology went down and weren't as crisp and clear, so we did lose quite a bit in from the 1914 till almost 1920, when the imagery, although it's captured here, and you can see it pretty well, but it's certainly not as crisp and as clear. And I just, and I love this photo. Looking down Main Street, you can see the bookstore there in the distance, which would have been the Colburn House at the time, the bank building on the left, and what's today Thai Basil, but the quality before they put the triangle room on. I think it was a dentist office at that point. And then, of course, there's the Albert type cards. And, these were prints that were, it was a process that was invented by Joseph Albert, who was a German photographer. And it was presented originally in 1868 at a photography exhibition in Hamburg and adopted as, Albert type. And what it was just basically colored negatives. And sometimes they'd almost have a cartoonish tinge to them. And they would take the Albert types, and oftentimes they would package them into little souvenir packs. And actually, I took a picture of one of the souvenir packs that we had from the early 1900s. And down here, that's actually the Sunderland Church. So it's interesting that he used Manchester in the mountains, and they took a Sunderland photo and put it on the cover. But the chapel down in Sunderland, and you'd flip through, and there would be a number of Albert type postcards that you could choose from. And this one has a full set of them, and some of the other images, and the colors would be brilliant often. And it would be interesting because sometimes you would actually be able to see, well, what color was that house? Because, as my friend Bill Badger, who is sitting in the second row, would go around, that's always the great guess of, well, you have these black and white photos, and I've had people who do colorizations. Anybody seen the colorization? There's a lot of people who are taking Civil War photos and colorizing them, and pictures of cityscapes and cars, and they're colorizing them. And I had a gentleman who was down in Bennington and was doing a number of these, and he reached out and he said, do you have some that you'd like to colorize? And I said, yes, but no. Because it's one of those things where how do you know what color it was? And you're just going to pick a color. And then, if you decide you wanted to make the Colburn House red, people will say, well, isn't the Colburn House red back then? And, that's how these things kind of get portrayed through. And, if you're like my kids, do they wonder if we had color when we were growing up? But yes, we did. No, it was a black and white world. Looking up Seminary Avenue, on the right-hand side is the original St. Paul's Church, which is today Larson Hall. just to tell you a little about that. So the only Catholic church in the area was St. Jerome's in East Dorset. And so a lot of the summer colony, when they would come up with a full, and a lot of them were Irish, they would come up with their staff. And the staff, if they wanted to go for services, they had to go out to East Dorset for them. Well, as you can imagine, in the 1880s, 1890s, that took a while. I mean, you didn't just, you'd either have to take the train or you would go out, by horse and wagon. And so that would be an all-day affair to go out for services. So the Orvis family decided, well, let's build them a church. So they built the church. And, it was built in 1894. I think it was opened in 96 and remained so until they opened up the new Catholic church on Bonnet Street. Or I kind of say the brick mothership. It's kind of big. And Sarah Larson actually purchased it, donated it to school, and had the belfry removed. And if you drive up Seminary Avenue and look at the side of it and you look at the roof, you can see how the slate is a little bit different color in the lower corner where the belfry used to be. Coming around the corner, this would be coming around the corner. Over here would be River Road and going up Main Street. And this would be, at the time, this would have been owned by either Henry Brown or Bartlett or Cal. I'm not exactly sure what year this was taken. Still there, beautiful white house. If you've driven by it recently, it's owned by the Redmond family. There's a lot of pumpkins along the upper porch. And to tell you a little story, that's actually represents each member of the family. So there is a method behind all those pumpkins up there. And a wonderful colorized version of Main Street. Over here, this would be the Mountain Goat building. So we'd no longer go in this entrance. This was the original entrance, which is now blocked off. But if you go there, at the time, this wouldn't have been combination cash. It was before the combination. This is when the Graves family still owned it. But if you go and stand at that doorway and you look up above the door, you can still see CCSCO, the Combination Cash Store Company, which is kind of interesting, the original doorway. And we go in through this section, which was the carriage barn, where they would sell the carriages. And then this is the law office. This is where all the cats are. Circa 50. Where all the cats are. And that, the Madison or the Hanley block, which was torn down in 1977, and now is kind of where the Union Underground, you kind of have the patio out there in the bank building. And this is the elm at the crossroads. This elm tree was cut down in 1937, and Walter Hard, I should have probably actually printed it, Walter Hard actually wrote a poem. You could go home and look up Elm at the Crossroads, Walter Hard, and read his poem, which is kind of nice.
That's actually the first roundabout.
Yeah, that'd be the Button Roundabout, right about where the Button Roundabout is. Yes, thank you, Bob. And then there's a short period, they called it the linen period, where they printed on linen paper, which kind of degraded the imagery a little bit. It started really in the 1930s. Not a big fan, but some of the imagery that came from it, the steeple in the Green Mountains. This was taken from Prospect Street looking down. You could not get that view today of seeing the chapel. And actually, I'm pretty sure that not only did the photographer take this photo, but then he went down the street a little bit and took this shot of the house that was there. This house is still there. It was actually owned by an African-American man in the early 1900s named Charles Bundy. One of the few that I could find where he actually owned the house. And now if you go by really quick, they still have a white picket fence out front. So I'm going to switch and kind of go a little thematic here, because it's kind of interesting to look at various parts of our town and see how it's changed over time. And postcards are a great way to see how things have changed over time. So I'm going to start with Equinox Pond. So the pond, again, for promotion of the area, they wanted to show, like, you had this big, beautiful pond here, come up from the city. So this is an early image that was turned into a postcard. I would say this is probably taken in the 1890s with a little Adirondack type, where the pavilion is today, if you've been up there recently. I have read some anecdotal stories about this little shed, and they would come up and have picnics, but it didn't last too long, so that we don't have a lot of photos of that. And once that was gone, you know, it was just an open beach. This is about where that would be standing. And they used to have swim rate. Burton had a swim team, and they would have swim meets up there in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. Has anybody ever gone in the water in late May, early June, like when school's in session? That water is cold. I mean, very cold. So I guess that would be a good place to have a swim meet, because when you hit the water, you wanted to get out of there as fast as you could. So you know, they're out there in the boats, and I wasn't able to find one. Yeah, there's a raft out there. You can see one of the rafts they would use for the swim meets. And you know, here's a shot, and it's been called the Orvis Pond. I mean, it was owned by the Orvis family, and still part of the Equinox Corporation. And over here is the bathhouse, which for a time there would be the ice houses, and then the ice houses were converted into bathhouses, and then we know the pavilion we see today. And then this is a little bit later on, and I wanted to share this postcard. I was going through the collection. We have a new collections manager who's joined us, and we were going through starting with the postcards, and she found that. She goes, "Oh, look at this! This is a typed postcard." And it was actually it says, "Hi, Richard. Junior and his team, Oddfellows, trimmed the Lions 12-3 tonight and took over first place in the Little League. No rain here today, but there is a shower in Dorset about 3 o'clock. Are you going to Camp Drum again? Uncle Paul." Uncle Paul was Uncle Paul Bullock, and he was the typing teacher at Burton, so that's why this is typed. And Junior would have been Paul Jr., who a lot of us will remember as Taco. Yeah, Taco. I got to work with Taco for a number of years at the park bench. So this is from 1961 when he said this. So yeah, so Mr. Bullock, ever proper, typed his postcards. And I figured, well, we're here, right? So let's see, what did the Arts Center? They produced numerous postcards, announcing, their annual exhibitions by the dozens. They would take pictures of the artwork. This is probably my favorite Ogden Pleiser. Not that I've seen that many. I've seen quite a few. Storm over Equinox. I was actually in a house. I can tell you that this painting resides not too far from here. When I walked through a living room and I looked and I said, and of course you have the painting. So I was delighted because I didn't know it was still here. So to walk and actually see the real painting hanging in someone's dining room was a thrill for me. And that it was still here. And of course, we have a lovely view of the Yester House by Bernadette Custer. And announcing the exhibitions, the 33rd annual exhibition at the Arts Center by the Southern Vermont artists. There's a William G. The photo was by William G. Sargent. He produced a number of postcards and would photograph a lot of the photos of the artwork. In the 1960s, actually, he took a lot of the photos of the artwork that we have. And unfortunately, I don't know what happened to his collection. I think he lived down on Cass Terrace. Am I right on that? Does anybody remember? Bill Sargent?
He lived on Main Street up here in the village, on the left hand, just above Mrs. Arkell's and Marion Haynes on that side. I don't know about Cass Terrace.
So some of the photographers who produced a lot of these postcards that we have in the collection, as finding out, well, where were they? What happened to their photos? And that's one of the things that kind of makes me a little nauseous sometimes, because I think a lot of times they just kind of probably ended up in the dumpster. Like, what are we going to do with all these photos? Frank Forward, which you'll see a number of his images coming up. I mean, he must have had thousands of photos that he took for I think, 30 years. Where did they all go? And then people will tell me, well, he lived right on the West Road. And I said, well, great. What happened to his collection? Paul Sample. Riding lessons, some of these imagery. And, I did have to put Louise Arkell, a couple pictures. I wanted to talk to her grandson. I was hoping he was going to be here tonight so I could say, do you remember this cat? Louise is actually the namesake for the Arkell pavilion out here, just outside the windows. And she produced, we have, I think, 8 or 9 of her pieces. No art critics. And the Huntress, who right now is displaced. at this time that this talk is happening, they are building the new exhibition, which will hold Lyman Norton's For the Love of Vermont collection, which is going to be really fantastic, coming in summer of 2026. Aquatic Country Club, which was a private club when it was founded, still a private club, but in the period from about 1900 through, I would say, 1950, they produced a lot of postcards. A few a little bit later on, but I don't think they would do postcards today. The entrance to the club, these are called the Cassard Gates, named for Herbert Cassard, who was actually, he was the kind of the superintendent of construction, I guess you could say, oversaw a lot of the construction. He actually donated these pillars. These pillars are still there. They're a little wider now, because this was done when it would just be one horse and wagon going through it. Lone Pine over here on the right, which is at the corner of Main Street and River Road, still there, and just, a little dirt, there's a little dirt Main Street. And you can see the evolution of the clubhouse. This is one of the earlier, probably 1905, 1904, and I can tell that because in the background is the church steeple, and the church steeple is still dark. Believe it or not, when that church was first built, all the way up until about, I think it was 1906, it had slate on it. And it would lean so heavily during high wind that they finally took the slate off it and replaced it with wood, which was probably a good idea because I don't think it would have made it this long. So that was one of the ways, it's usually the clues you try to find out of, well, clubhouse was done in 1900, that's still dark until 1906, so it's probably in those, an early shot of the clubhouse. And and you could tell whether or not there was a boardwalk that went next to the road that was added, in the first few years. This is before the boardwalk. This is after the boardwalk was added, and you can see there's actually an early automobile kind of sticking its nose out there, backed up to the buckboards and the other wagons that would bring people down from the Equinox House. They would pay to go from the hotel down to the golf course, or walk in some cases. And 1911, they added an extension to the clubhouse, so they had 100 new lockers, dressing rooms, and it was interesting, lavatories and 3 marble shower baths in that extension. So this would probably be about 1911, 1912. Mr. Bartlett Arkell actually paid for a complete renovation of the clubhouse, and that's actually the same clubhouse that was actually kind of unveiled in 1936, 37, and unfortunately burned down in 1938. In October of 1938, this beautiful clubhouse burned to the ground. And Mr. Arkell also basically underwrote all except $5,000 worth of the new clubhouse, which we see today. So you get to see kind of the progression of some of these buildings, how they were, and then all of a sudden they're not there. And every once in a while, I will get an inquiry saying, I have these pictures of the Aquatic Clubhouse, and it doesn't look like the clubhouse I remember. I said, well, it's not the original clubhouse. Really? Really? Some great images, from the course. This is an early photo of the course. This is actually the 4th green and the 14th green, and it had this little, it was a shared green. It had this little zigzag mound that went through dividing the 2 greens. And that's actually Charles Blair McDonald, who was kind of considered one of the fathers of golf putting, and James Taylor, who was one of the co-founders of the club, who's Lone Pine, I mentioned, the big yellow house there at the corner of River Road. So you get to see these images, and it was great to have them colorized. And then the pit, the largest natural hazard, is very cleaned up now. And it was just, we have some interesting images of it. It was just the large depression in the course, and a lot of early photos of it. They still had tree stumps down in there, and an old shed down in there, and you can see this is early because you can see the church. Maybe you can't see the church so good, but the church is here, and it was still painted as 2-tone green with a green slate spire. And then this is the famous long 7th. A shot during the 1914 National Amateur that was held there, or the U.S. Amateur, as we like to refer to it now.
Was that the year that Francis Wilmette won it?
That is the year Francis Wilmette won. He played Aquatic a few times. We know he was there in 1912 for the President's Cup. He did not win. He won the 1914. He was back in 27 for an exhibition match when when the Equinox opened the new course. Travis was very sick at the time. He designed the Equinox course, but he was there to play at an exhibition mat. He was also, for the 25th anniversary in '39, he came back for that, and he was there for the 1962 Seniors Invitational. So he came back here a lot. He really enjoyed Manchester and Aquanic. So, you know, we've been kind of doing a little bit, and I don't want to put anybody to sleep, so I thought I'd put a few pictures for fun up here of some of the postcards. Nobody's falling asleep, which is good, except for my fiance. No, just kidding. 2 more payments and it's all ours. So, Bill, they're not going to be able to hear you online, so you tell it, and I'm going to repeat it back so they can hear it.
That was Davis House.
The Davis House.
It sat up off the middle road into Landgrove.
They set up off the middle road into Landgrove
And before Floodbrook School.
before Floodbrook School.
Well, where it was here, but originally it was up on the mountain.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
they took it apart, they sawed through all the mortise and tendons.
They saw
Reassembled it as a beer hall.
as a beer hall.
And when Prohibition was over. But since they had sawed through the tendons, it slowly collapsed. Because it was structural tape, just nails didn't work.
So for those of you watching at home saying, what is he saying? This was up on the mountain, and it was basically turned into a beer hall. And you know, when they took it apart and put it back together, well, it didn't hold together all that great. You know, the Green Mountains, I love this. You know, the Green Mountains, what some people think of Vermont, and still do. You know, maple sugar grew on trees. You know, there's the Green Mountains. There's the milk factories. You know, if you wanted to drive there, you know, you'd have, you know, it would be the cars meeting the horse and wagons. You know, there's the farmer and the village bell. 6 weeks in the year with no snow. Yeah, and they do have the thermostat over here, so 40 degrees. So this is copyrighted 1908. Yeah, 40 below, yeah, copyrighted 1908. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of truth in there, right? And of course, you know, we get to Snow Valley. When I grew up skiing, and GISP is how I learned to ski, except at Prospect Mountain down in Bennington, which doesn't even have downhill anymore. We used to call this the yard sales. You know, you have a yard sale. You crash and everything is gone, and you have to hike back up the hill to get everything. You know, how to ski. You know, and the skis broke. I never crashed so hard that I actually broke a ski. I can say that. You know, there's a whole series of these, you know, dear old friend of days gone by, have you forgotten quite the jolly time we used to have? If not, why don't you write? And then, the rose is red, the violet is blue, this town is a Hummer, let me hear from you. So, and they used Aquanic Clubhouse for that one, I'm not really sure why. But, and this is a repeat from the first one, so if you were at the first one, you can tune out for a minute. I just love the, you know, the writings they would come up with, you know, Manchester in the mountains, Vermont. She lies in the Vattenkill Valley where health and contentment abide. Mount Equinox towering above her, looks down on her beauties with pride. From the depths of the wilderness fashioned by the toil of the brave pioneers to a village of progress and culture, her growth has kept pace with the years. For wealth of her harvest in autumn, no peer in Vermont can be found. As the center of golf the world over, this famous resort has been crowned, and thousands that yearly come hither to seek the fair goddess of rest find Manchester deep in the mountains, the Mecca, the peaceful, the blessed. So there you go.
Does anybody know the author of that?
No. I don't. There's no more, I found no, I mean, I suppose I could probably do a reverse image lookup, but it's probably been published somewhere else besides this postcard. But no, I don't know who the author is. Now you gave me homework. You know, and so, you know, the kind of the photochrome period. I feel like we should be playing Kodachrome by 1945 to present. Again, showing kind of the, how buildings have changed over the year, how businesses have changed. We'll start, early shot of the basket barn. Originally when it was just the one barn, and then as time went on, well, they added on to it. I still miss it. I still have a couple pieces from Basketville. There is still a Basketville, right? Is there still a Basketville? It was up in Brattleboro, Putney. Yeah, it's not what it was. Nah, it's never what it was. Because you walked in and I found this post. I mean, remember you would walk in and I mean, what a great. I mean, you get lost in there. The hampers. If you have a Cobra, you could put a Cobra in the basket and see if you know. The jelly mill. The jelly mill. I mean, it was an actual barn built by Judge Loveland Munson in 1878, and they wrote about it in the Manchester Journal, saying the finest barn and I think they might have even called it the finest barn in the state, had running water in it, and it was partially heated. Magnificent.
I remember when that, you see, if you notice on the upper left-hand corner of the roof, there's paint. There was a painting contractor in Londonderry, Vermont that actually got that job. I remember when that was done, and they sprayed it, and they didn't cover it, and that was a big turmoil.
Really?
Yeah.
So for those.
Guys that painted it.
So for those of you who are at home wondering why all of a sudden I went quiet, so in the right up here there's a big overspray, literally, of paint that the contractors who painted it did a little bit of overspray and caused some issues. So what I can tell you is my friend Richard Farley actually put up, it was one of his first big jobs, he actually put up that sign that said the Jelly Mill. Now it's a large sign, still there, grandfathered in. And his father was Tom Farley, who ran the Equinox House. So they were putting up started putting it up, they had part of it up. And Tom was, I think, hopefully I'll get the story right. I think it was Tom was down at the barber shop. I don't know if it was Ted's back then. This would have been in probably 68, 69, or no, maybe early 70s. I can't remember exactly when he put it up. Somewhere right around. Yeah, right around then. And so Tom heard that there were some people complaining about it. The sign was be way too big, and they better stop him before. So Tom went home, or went back up to the village, said, "You boys better get that sign up on there before somebody comes and tells you to stop." So they all ran down there and they banged that sign up on the thing, took all the ladders home, and there it sat. He said one of the fastest installs he's ever done. And then a lovely interior shot. It was fun, and it was great to go to the Buttery. Really enjoyed time there.
They moved here from Brattleboro. Place in Brattleboro burnt to the ground.
And then, an evening shot with the Jefferson statuary, which, thankfully did find a second life in front of the bookstore, which is still, so that is still here. And then, just we'll do a little for nostalgia purposes for you locals who have been here a long time, looking down Main Street. Not exactly sure what year this was done, but this is what, the Quality had their the neon sign. That probably wouldn't go over this day and age either. I could tell you it's after 1955 because there are parking meters. I always hesitate to say what year because if I say it was 1960, somebody will say, "That's a 65 Ford right there. That's not." So I don't even touch what year things are if there's an automobile in it. Then there's a fight about what year. Nope, that's. And then the Sweet Clover Luncheonette, which is where Christo's is over there, and the State Liquor Store, which actually that building is vacant now, so you could go there for the liquor store, and Ted's Barber Shop. It's right there at the brick building. There's a little sign out there, which I can see it on my screen. Can you see it up there? So I'll show you. Right up here, Ted's Barber Shop. Right above the Sweet Clover, just above. And then the lower part was called the Hub. Does anybody remember the Hub? I see a couple hands. It was a fashion boutique. Am I right? With all the latest fashions.
What's the sign on the Culver House thing?
That actually says Antique Show. It's actually a flag going across Main Street saying Antique Show. And they used to string banners across Main Street until not all that long ago. And then the Harvest Inn, which is today's Mulligan's, the Goot Beer family. You know, I just imagine parking in front of that. So where the cars are parked today, that's where they have the outdoor dining. So when you drive by Mulligan's, I'm in the parking lot. And Grandma Moses had her birthday party there. There's a great picture of Grandma Moses getting her birthday cake at the Harvest Inn, the Goot Beers. And the Reluctant Panther, the original Panther. So a little quick story about the Reluctant Panther. So this burned down, I think, in 2003 and was completely rebuilt. It was actually Woody Cornell who actually came up here and bought the Reluctant Panther. And the reason why it was painted purple, because, well, if anybody knew Woody Cornell, Woody was, you know, he liked his, you know, he liked colorful things. And so he started painting the inn that he bought all different colors, and everybody was very upset. Like, what the, what? And so he ended up settling on purple, and there was nothing anybody could do about it because there was no zoning. And it was, I think, somewhat grandfathered in because everything must be white with black shutters, right? Yeah. No, he painted it purple. And then, of course, you know, now we're into the Frank Ford period, and I still remember seeing the horses. I know that I can't remember the name of the family who actually had the horse and carriages out, but I can see them still. Does anybody remember their names? Anybody? I think it'd be fun to bring it back again, just to really upset people with the horse and carriage, you know, trotting down, you know, from the center. I mean, can you imagine? Holy smokes! You know, and another shot of the Equinox looking, you know, with the nice benches along Main Street. I don't know if I would sit in those benches today with the cars going by there, but so, you know, I've been chatting here for a while. It's 6:25. You know, the fun thing about going through all these postcards is I get lost sometimes, and putting this together was a whole lot of fun for me, and I really hope that you enjoyed, you know, kind of going this little trip down memory lane. This is a shot that I'll kind of end with, kind of going back to, well, not the beginning, but this is looking, if you were standing in front of Vermont Kitchen Supply looking north, there's the Mountain Goat building, just to give you an idea. And this was Main Street, probably about 1905 or so. You can see over here is the engine house, which was picked up in 1920. It was picked up in 1920, the high hose tower on it. It was picked up and moved to Adams Park. It was Wines by George for years and years, and now is a little gift shop called Squirrel, which is quite lovely. And the large square building you see there was what was left of the woolen mill and became Linborn's Esso station, and that's where the gas station is today. But you can see, so this would have been a summer day. Not a lot going on in the center. Not a lot going on, and I'm pretty sure the photographer probably didn't wake up at 6 in the morning just so he could get no traffic. So, you know, again, thank you, Gloria. I really always enjoy the opportunity to come and to share with both people here and online. It's 6:27. I mean, I did pretty good. Usually I go a little over, so, you know, so thank you.